We're going to be in Leviticus in the 2nd chapter this evening. Not for long, though. Leviticus chapter 2. So last time we did a bit of an introduction. I reminded you what the tabernacle is like and kind of the layout of the camp of Israel. They're currently down near Sinai. God is giving instructions to Moses now that the tabernacle has been completed. And the first things that he's giving instructions about are the sacrifices. So we went through burnt offerings. Burnt offerings are what they sound like. You burn the whole offering. Whether it's of the herd or it's of the flock or if it's even birds, you burn the entirety of it. It goes in, it stays in. Because its purpose is to be what we would think of as a true sacrifice. When we talk about really making a sacrifice for someone, we are not really getting anything out of it. I'm just losing to you. And now I'm doing it because I like you, or I'm doing it because I'm forced to, or I'm doing it, like I may have my motivation, sure. But you're getting all of it. It's yours. And that's what it was for a burnt offering. It was to give it to God in its entirety. So I refer to that one as an I love God offering, because that's its whole purpose. I'm not asking for something with a burnt offering. I'm not making a petition. I'm not making a plea. I'm not coming to God with a concern. If I have one of those, I'm probably going to use more of a peace offering. We're going to talk about that hopefully tonight as well. But a burnt's not the one I'm going to go to. The burnt is, I've had a child and I am so excited. Burnt offering. That's a burnt offering. In your heart, you might be thinking, God be with me, help this kid to grow. But that's not the purpose of the offering. It's a thankful. It's an I love God. It's a wonderful offering. We talked about grain offerings. That was the second one. I'm going to give it about 4 minutes because I really like the peace offering and I want to get there as fast as I can. The grain offering is a wild one. It's got a whole bunch of regulations. Read chapter 2. You can read those regulations again. You can bring a variety of kinds of grain offering, whether it's unleavened breads, or it's wafers, or it's griddle cakes, or it's just flour. It's got a lot of options. I do want to make you aware of Numbers chapter 15. If you want to write that down, I'm going to encourage you to read it on your own time. I'm not going to go and read it because it's verses 1 through 21. Talks about the grain offering again. And the big difference between Leviticus's recording of the grain offering and Numbers' recording of the grain offering is the phrase, when you come into the land. So in Leviticus, it just tells you about the grain offering. But in Numbers, it says, when you come into the land, meaning when you are in Canaan and you are settled in that land, then you bring a grain offering every single time you have a sacrifice. Every single one of them. Not just occasionally, not just as its own thing, but every one of them. And you have to bring a drink offering, which is it's normally a wine offering. It talks about that in Numbers 15 as well. So I encourage you to read through that. So there's a shift there, probably due to the fact that when you're wandering in the wilderness, you don't grow a ton. But when you are in the land, God is going to prosper you, and so you will have grown some things. Therefore, every single sacrifice you need to be giving back. The other one I want to point out is from Leviticus 6. You can turn over there with me. I put in your notes Leviticus 6, 14 through 23. It's 2 stages here. Verse 14 through verse 18 talks about how the priest interacts with a grain offering. We've already had a little bit of that. The priest comes in, he takes the handful off, he throws the handful onto the altar, and the rest of it goes to him. It gives a little more detail here if you'd like to read through that. But it's 19 through 23 is the one I really want to hone in on, because this is the beginning of the difference between a priest offering a sacrifice for himself and a Jew of any other tribe offering a sacrifice. When a Jew of any tribe, I'm of Zebulun, and I came in with my grain offering, I gave it to the priest, he took the handful of it with all the frankincense, he threw it onto the altar, and the priest carried it away. But notice, when we get down into chapter 6 and verse 19, this is the offering that Aaron and his sons offer to the Lord on the day when he is anointed. 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, of regular grain, and so forth and so on. We can skip down just a little bit. It talks about making of the grain offering. But in verse 22, The priest from among Aaron's sons who is anointed to succeed him shall offer it to the Lord as decreed forever. The whole of it shall be burned. Every grain offering of a priest shall be wholly burned. It shall not be eaten. There's your change. And we're going to see this with the peace offerings. It's got some comments about priests offering peace offerings, though it's not nearly as strict. But the sin and the guilt offerings are going to have those regulations as well, is that there's a difference between when a priest comes in and offers a sacrifice and when any other tribe or even a regular Levite comes in and offers a sacrifice. And the big difference is the role of the priest in relation to God and in relation to the rest of the tribes. He is their go-between. That's why we look at Christ, and he is our high priest. He is our advocate with the Lord. He is the one who takes our sinful self and brings it to God in a way that God does not turn around and destroy us. That's a priest. That was their whole purpose. So if I'm a priest and I'm coming to God, I have no advocate. I stand before God alone. Just me. So who is of the next tier of holiness that is allowed to eat my offering? There is no one. But if you're of Issachar and you bring your sacrifice in, there is a higher tier of holiness, someone closer to God than you are, the priesthood. Therefore, they can eat. But there is no one higher than the priest. That's it. You're out. Those are the only ones. And so I wanted to make that clear here, because especially when we talk about the sin offering, there's a whole section on what do you do when it's a priest compared to everyone else. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on grain offerings before we get into peace offerings? Very good question. Let's go back to chapter 6. Chapter 6 and verse 16. So, when you've brought your sacrifice, you're Zebulun, you've brought it in, you're not a Levite, you're not a priest. It says, and the rest of it Aaron and his sons shall eat. It shall be eaten unleavened in a holy place. In the court of the tent of meeting they shall eat it. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as their portion of my food offerings. It is a thing most holy, like the sin offering and the guilt offering. Every male among the children of Aaron may eat of it, as decreed forever throughout your generations from the Lord's food offerings. Whatever touches them shall be holy. So note the specificity. You must be of Aaron's sons. But he also broadens it. He doesn't limit it to just those actively serving as priests, because it could be possible someday in the future to have so many that they're not all serving actively at exactly the same time. Because yes, even though the Temple Mount is large, they may have too many of Aaron's lineage to be able to stand around one location. And so he broadens it. Every male of Aaron's family is allowed to eat of it, not just those who are actively serving as priests. Any other comments? That's a great point. Definitely one that needs to be brought up. It's also important to notice that it is a most holy thing, like the sin and the guilt offering. Sin and guilt is going to get a lot of attention because that is what takes my sins away. This is just as important, God says. Anything else? Okay, let's take a look at peace offerings. I like peace offerings. I like them all, let's just be honest. But peace and sin are probably some of my favorites just because of the nuance of sin as well as just the awesomeness that is a peace offering. Because what do? If you are of the tribe of Zebulun, I'm going to stick with that one for a while, and you want a closer relationship to God, how do you get it? Well, let's think about this for just a moment, because this is the foundation of a peace offering. You and your neighbor don't get along, but you want to have a better relationship with them. What are some things that you might do in order to try to bring the two families closer together? What do you guys think? Food. That's the answer. It's always the answer, right? New person moves into the neighborhood, you bring them a plate of food, right? That's an old tradition. What do you do if you want to get to know somebody who sits on this side of the church when you're here for worship and you sit on that side of the church? You get together for food. I want a better relationship with God, so I'm going to have a meal with him. That's our peace offering. Now, let's take a look at how that's done, because God is God, and inviting him over and pulling the chair out for him is not practical. It doesn't happen. So how can I, a mortal man here on earth, share a meal with God? Peace offering. Let's talk about these. We're going to take it as a whole. We've got 3 different tiers of peace offerings. From verse 1 through verse 5, we have one type of animal. 6 through 11, we have another, and 12 through the end of the chapter, we have the third kind of peace offerings animals. What are my options? There's only 4 kinds of animals that are used in sacrifices, and you all know what they are. So what are the options? Lamb, very good. I can bring up something of the flock as a peace offering. Okay? What's another animal that they have? It's large, lots and lots of blood. A bull. I can bring of the herd. And the last one is kind of like a sheep, but scrawnier. A goat. I can bring a goat. So those are my options. Why are these the options? Because they're all over the place. Those are the options. Now, he doesn't give a turtle dove option for peace offerings here. Why doesn't he give a turtle dove offering for peace offerings? Because it's really hard to eat a turtle dove. Split multiple ways. Like, let's just be honest, right? It's hard. So he doesn't offer that. So we've got the herd is first. That's verses 1 through 5. We've got of the flock is second, 6 through 11. And we've got the goat at the end of the chapter. In verse 1, if his offering is a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offers an animal from the herd, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. Verse 6, if he brings one of the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If you go down to verse 12, if his offering is a goat, he shall offer it before the Lord. He doesn't say male or female again, but in a while he's going to make a big deal about female goats and male goats, and so I think the implication is God just stopped repeating himself. You can bring male or female here. It doesn't have to be necessarily the most valuable, it just has to be without blemish. It is something good that is being offered. Okay, let's go a little further. Again, with the burnt offerings, it's the same procedure. He shall lay his hand on the head of the offering in verse 2. He kills it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Aaron's sons, the priests, throw the blood against the sides of the altar. In verse 7, if he's offering a lamb, he offers it before the Lord. He lays his hand on the head of the offering. He kills it in front of the tent of meeting. Aaron's sons throw the blood against the sides of the altar, and we see the same thing happen in verse 13. So not a lot of differences here, right? It looks very similar to a burnt offering. I brought it, I put my hand on it, it was slaughtered. They're throwing the blood on the altar of burnt offerings. But then we see the change, the shift here. So we'll stick with of the herd with verse 3. From the sacrifice of the peace offering as a food offering to the Lord, you are to offer certain things. What is the first thing that you're supposed to offer? The fat that is covering what? The entrails. It's all the fat. But it says the fat that's covering the entrails. We're going to have the phrase, you're to give me all the fat later on. But at this point, that's what he's highlighting. So all the fat that is on the entrails, that's the same wording he's going to use over there in verse 14 with a goat. All the fat that is on the entrails, it's the same wording that he uses in verse 9 when he's describing, it's a little bit different with the flock. We'll cover that one in a minute. But it is in there in verse 9 as well, all the fat that covers the entrails. So that's the same. Okay? What's the second thing? Verse 4. Yes, both of the kidneys with all the fat that's on them. Don't forget the fat. Okay? And what's the last? The liver. I don't know if there's a difference between the long lobe of the liver and the liver. I didn't look it up. I just didn't. Y'all can tell me if there's a difference. I'm just going to move on. Okay. So we've got the parts that are supposed to go to God. That is what's removed. We've got the fat that's on the entrails, the kidneys, and the liver. We've taken it, and in verse 5, Aaron's sons burn it on top of the altar, on top of the burnt offering, which is the wood on the fire, or which is on the wood on the fire. It's a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. I've given it to God. That is burned. But wait, there's more. What about the rest of the animal? We're going to talk about that in a second. Goat is the same way. They prepared it exactly like they did with the bull, and they throw it on exactly the same way. Slightly different when we come to of the flock. In verse 9, it makes a big deal about you remove the whole fat tail, cut off close to the backbone, and the fat that it covers the entrails and the kidneys and the liver as well are to be burned on the altar. So, the tail as well. I'm told it was a delicacy. I've not had sheep tail. Any comments anybody has on what we've discussed thus far? We're going to have to talk about that next week. Because we're coming to it. and yeah, we're not going to get to that answer quite today. But it's good that you're asking, because that means that you read ahead, and I appreciate that. Or you were paying attention when we talked about how it's very holy. Yeah, it's definitely important. Okay, any comments on the piece? Yes.
Whose responsibility was it to determine if these animals were without blemish? Did it have to be something that was highly visible?
Yeah, it would be the priest. He has the final say here. You've brought your animal, and he is the one that decides whether or not this was correct or not. It's always important to remember you're in the front of the tent of meeting. This is not done in secret. There are other people with their animals right there next to you. And if you're looking down and you've got this giant spot on the side of yours, or, it's missing half a hoof, and everybody around you's not, I think there also would be some shame involved to make sure that you bring that which is actually good. Any other comments? Okay. Let's move forward to chapter 7. Because like any good section of the scriptures, we have the principle and then we have the detail to follow. Does it in the beginning of Genesis with creation. We're doing it here with the sacrifices. In chapter 7, down in verse 11 through 38, we're not going to read it all because I want to talk about other things tonight other than just reading through it. So hopefully you've read it and done some preparing ahead of time. But this is the law of the sacrifice offerings that one may offer to the Lord. Verse 11 starts there. Remember, this section, God is talking specifically to the priesthood, or those who will be priests. Let me rephrase that. They're not priests yet. Those who are going to become priests, because they don't become priests for, I think, another chapter. Yeah, chapter 8. We'll talk about that when we get to the priest section. Okay, you're bringing your sacrifice of a peace offering. And now we're going to start to throw some wrenches into this. Because God gives us three categories of peace offerings that we need to discuss. The first category is found in verse 12. One comes and offers it as a what? What does it say? An expression of thankfulness, a thanksgiving peace offering, a peace offering of thanksgiving. All of those phrases you're going to find here, so I want to run through them. Let's drop down a little bit and get the other ones. In verse 16, you can bring your sacrifice of offering if it's a certain kind of offering or another kind of offering. What are the other two options? Vow and voluntary. Okay, so these are our three. You've got a thanksgiving, you've got a vow, and you've got a voluntary. Some of yours might say a free will one. Free will is pretty easy to understand, right? I wanted to give it, I did. Doesn't really need to be much more complicated than that. A vow is, I have vowed and I will repay it. So, I have vowed to God, if God does X, I will give him a peace offering. Now, that one might make us a little uncomfortable because that sounds like buying and trading, right? We're bargaining with God a little bit. But welcome to this is them. This is not how the Jews decided how to run things either. This is how God decided how to run things. That you must be prepared to sacrifice in order for me to pay attention. There's a relationship here. You do this, I'll do this. So that's the vow one. A vow one might also be, I really want my child to come through this and they're very ill right now. If you will help, I will give a peace offering. And remember, a peace offering is a dinner. It is a meal. It is shared between God and you and someone else we haven't yet talked about. Okay? And then you have the Thanksgiving one. I am coming with thanksgiving. I am coming because my child has pulled through, and I'm grateful for it, so I'm going to offer a Thanksgiving one. I didn't make a vow with you. I didn't make any kind of relationship bargaining with you. I didn't say a prayer to you, but I'm coming with thanksgiving. I keep using children because it's just easy to understand. We all get that one. So those are our three main kinds. The free will and the vow kind of get lumped together, and the thanksgiving get lumped together. So what's the big difference? Let's look at it. With the thanksgiving one in verse 12, he says, when you come with your thanksgiving sacrifice, you are to bring unleavened loaves mixed with oil, unleavened wafers smeared with oil, and loaves of fine flour mixed with oil. So you have to bring more food than just the meat. Why? Because it's a meal. And people tend to expect, if you're going to invite them to your home, more than just one thing. That makes sense, right? Read on. In verse 13, with the sacrifice of his peace offering for thanksgiving, he shall bring his offering with loaves of leavened bread. Well, hold on a second. Whoa, wait a second. You're to bring unleavened loaves, unleavened wafers, loaves of fine flour that are mixed with oil that are leavened. Why does he include leavened bread? We've already decided leaven equals sin, right? Frequently, but not always. Sometimes it's a good thing. A little leaven leavens the whole lump can be taken good as well as bad. Jesus meant it bad in that context, but still holds true. The simple reason is it's yummy. Yeah. If you're going to eat a meal, do you want unpuffy, harder bread? Or do you want to eat a meal with some light dinner rolls? Do we not tend to say if the bread comes out a little bit burned and a little bit hard, ooh, this is not great bread? But if it comes out nice and buttery and lovely, we say it's good bread because it's a meal. And I keep wanting to emphasize that. You bring loaves of leavened bread with it. In verse 14, from it he shall offer one loaf from each offering as a gift to the Lord. Some of the wafers, some of the unleavened, and some of the leaven goes on to the altar. And then it shall belong to the priest who throws the blood of the peace offerings. He is to offer part of what you've given. He is to take part of it himself. And you are to keep some of it. Because this is a meal between three. It is a meal between you and God and his priesthood. Now, why do we include the priesthood? Because it's easier to see the priests eat your food than it is to see God eat your food. So I can watch them eat. I can know that I've nourished them. I can know that someone here on earth is partaking of my sacrifice. And they are my advocate. They are my go-between. They are the one who took my unholy offering and brought it to the Lord as a holy offering. Because if you look in chapter 17, if I try to do that myself, it is unholy while wandering in the wilderness. It changes once they get in the land, but we'll talk about that. By the way, if anybody wants to know, you can look at chapter 17. The questions for it are on page 4, the very next one. So we'll probably get to it in a week or so. Maybe 2. Anybody have any questions on that so far?
If it's it's a voluntary or vow offering, they can eat it over 2 days. If it's a standard peace offering, they've got to eat it all that day.
Yeah, if it's a Thanksgiving, it's all in one day. That's found down in verse 15. So you have today to eat a Thanksgiving one. And you have a couple of days to eat it if it's a vow offering, down in verse 17 and in verse 18. You have today and you have tomorrow to eat one that is a free will or a vow. The big nuance is, why are you offering it? There's a lot involved with intention with sacrifices. I intend to give this to God as a burnt offering. I intend to give it to God as a peace offering. I intend it to be a thanksgiving. I intend it to be a vow. If it's a vow, other people may know about your vow, so there may be witnesses to the actual giving of it. I intend it to be a free will, because the heart matters. This is something that the Jews forget almost immediately, and the prophets over and over and over again have to slap them about the face trying to get them to realize it, is that God doesn't just care that you brought the animal and you did the movements correctly. He cares about your heart. He cares about your intention. And so if your intention is to just go through the motions and put something up there so that you can get done with this and go back to your life, God will not accept. So yes, intention is the biggest distinction between them. But then you've also got the 1 day versus multiple days, 2 days with the other. Any other comments on the peace offering? We're doing a great job of covering it. Yeah?
Kind of historical context, and like, was this happening multiple times a day, or was it happening a couple times a week, or
With the peace offering, it is when you want to give it. So whether it's done, I imagine, multiple times a day, because if you've got several 100,000 options of offerers, you're going to at least get 2 or 3. So yeah, this is going to be multiple times a day. And remember, this is part of what the priests are supposed to eat when they're working. They're supposed to eat this meat. They're supposed to have of this bread. They're supposed to have the bread of the grain offering, which kind of gets mixed up with this one, right? So we've got a lot of food being offered to the priests, sometimes more than they can even do, which is a problem that they have later on. Any other thoughts? These are good questions. All right, let's read a little. Yes.
I see a great parallel with the Lord's Supper whenever Jesus told us to eat each and drink his blood in an unworthy manner.
Yeah.
So I think that's very.
There's a lot of parallels with the Lord's Supper here.
Discerning the Lord's body, the blood, and we're controlling this.
Yeah, it's definitely, we need to examine our hearts and we need to examine our intention. But you can see the Lord's Supper in the peace offering. Christ himself participating. He is both that which shall be offered. He is the high priest. He is God eating with his disciples. Like that is a peace offering right there. God literally eating with his people. The priest right there eating of that peace offering. So yeah, you can even see the symbolism extending forward into us. All right, let's go a little further. I want to get to the sin offering, at least some. In verse 19 of chapter 7, flesh that touches any unclean thing shall not be eaten. Be careful when you prepare this. That's what that is talking about. So if anything looks like it's become unclean, if you're concerned it's become unclean, burn it, it says. The person who eats of the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offerings while an uncleanness is on him shall be cut off from his people. That's harsh. But when we get to the sin offering, you're going to see there is no allowances for someone who is intentionally careless. Because that's what you're going to have to be. To come and offer a sacrifice to God at his tabernacle with his priesthood and be unclean. Careless deliberately. As in someone who has not prepared themselves for this. Probably we can go into someone who's just going through the motions. There is no sacrifice for the intentional sin. We're going to see that with the sin offering here in just a minute. But I'm giving you some previews because there's a lot of crossover. In verse 22, Speak to the people of Israel, saying, you shall eat no fat of ox or sheep or goat, the fat of an animal that dies of itself, the fat of one that is torn by beasts may be put to any other use, but on no account shall you eat it. For every person who eats of the fat of an animal of which a food offering may be made to the Lord shall be cut off from his people. Moreover, you shall eat no blood, whatever, whether of fowl or of animal or in any of your dwelling places. Whoever eats any blood, that person shall be cut off from his people. You shall not, under any circumstances, eat fat of any animal that can be offered. That's what it says. So there are a few clean animals that are not offered. They tend to be small, and probably trying to get the fat off of them may not be as easy. We'll talk about unclean animals in 2 weeks. But if it's a clean animal, by and large, if you're going to eat it, it's probably of one of the big three: the herd, the flock, or the goats. That's what you're eating. Those are your staples. And you've got quail that's going to come in here in a minute. I'm not going to talk about quail. That's the whole thing. We're just going to stick here. No fat. Why? Yeah?
Actually wondering that as we were reading and talking about it. I mean, it seems to me the sole reason that I've found, maybe there's others, but is because that's sacred. It belongs to God. It's God's, and you're not supposed to take it. Any other reasons ever given?
You guys think cooking with fat's yummy? Sure does. Get that bacon grease down at the bottom, right? We look at the fat and we say, fat's yummy. It's delicious. God took it. Like literally, God took it. He made it holy. It's a yummy part, and he made it his own. Interestingly, he takes the liver, he takes the kidneys as well, which during this time a lot of people used for divination. God says, nope, you can't keep those. I'm going to take them. So you can't use them. It's interesting how he functions here, taking away what other religions are utilizing and keeping it for himself, such as priests who very much enjoyed the fat of their sacrifices, who are worshipers of Baal or Asherah or something of that kind. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it. But in Leviticus, you do not eat the fat because God tells you not to. That's it. And in fact, when we get to the unclean animals, that's a point he's going to make. So if you guys are filling out your questions, I asked that question in a couple of pages. Why is he saying this? It's because God wants them to understand you do it because I tell you to. Therefore, that now makes it holy. And so whether or not that we have the right answers for fat, I don't know. I think we got a pretty good answer for kidneys and liver. That one's a pretty good one. But God took it. It's his. Any other thoughts?
Well, the Jews thought that all source of thought and feelings came from your gut.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the important part of any animal.
Yeah.
And God gets all of that.
Yeah. Which is very common in the ancient world. We even say that. I have a gut instinct. Why do we say that? Because that's where I thought it, right? That's where that came from. Well, we say it because that's where you feel it. You feel it going on. Okay. Verse 29. When you come with your peace offering, it says, whoever offers the sacrifice of his peace offering to the Lord shall bring his offering to the Lord from the sacrifice of his peace offering. His own hands shall bring the Lord's food offering. His hands, not the offerer, meaning the priest, but the one who brought it to the tabernacle himself. He shall take the fat with the breast, and he shall heave it up as a wave offering, as a heave offering before the Lord. You literally pick it up and you give it to God. And then, what does he say? Then the priest shall burn the fat on the altar, but the breast shall be for Aaron and his sons. So, this is the conclusion of the meal. Yes?
The peace offering was only for God.
Say it again.
The peace offering was only for God, right?
And the priest.
The priest.
Yeah.
But the wording of it seems to me that peace offering is to God. It's not totally to him. So that was going to be my next part. Why are the priests able to be part of it if the peace offering is to God?
Let me ask a question and answer. Did Jesus eat of the supper? And is he our high priest? He does. And he even goes so far as to say that I'm going to keep eating with it when I eat it new. Because the priest is supposed to be belonging to it, because that's a part of the peace offering. So what you've got is you've got a communal meal. You've invited God's holiest on earth, and you have invited God. Well, I've left it on the altar. That's hard to connect to. And so God gave us a high priest. It's the same reason he gave us Jesus. God himself, God the Father, is hard to connect to. He's abstract. He's difficult for us to grasp. But when we think of Jesus, we think of a man, don't we? We do. He's easy to relate to. I give him a face. I give him a beard. I can see him walking along. I don't know how he walked or what he even looked like, but I can relate to him, just like with the peace offering. So it's a communal meal. You've got the offerer eats some of this too. We haven't really gotten to him yet. So the sacrificer, the priest himself is to be eating. God is to be eating. But there's a whole lot more that does not go onto the altar that is to be eaten by you, the man of Zebulun, who has brought your sacrifice in too. So the meal is still going on. It's just developing. But you're on the right track.
Back to Dick's class, we're getting totally Jewish now. I asked the question, you answer it.
I'm falling into the habits of Leviticus here. Let's go a little further, because they don't just get the breast. In verse 32, the right thigh you shall give to the priest as well as a contribution from the sacrifice of your peace offerings. Whoever among the sons of Aaron offers the blood of the peace offering and the fat shall have the right thigh for a portion. So you've got the breast for Aaron and his sons. You've got the right thigh for the one who did the blood. Those might be two different people here. Like, yes, the one who did the blood is one of Aaron's sons, but he's specific amongst Aaron's sons. So he gets the right thigh. For the breast that is waved and the thigh that is contributed, I have taken from the people of Israel out of the sacrifices of the peace offerings. I have given them to Aaron and the priest and to his sons as a perpetual due from the people of Israel. This is the portion of Aaron and his sons from the Lord's food offerings from the day that they were presented to serve as priests of the Lord. The Lord commanded this to be given them by the people of Israel from the day that he anointed them. It is perpetually due throughout their generations. It is a thing you owe to them, but it is also a thing that you do with them. So the rest of the meal is taken by you. Anything that wasn't burned for God, anything that wasn't given to the priest is taken by you, and you have until tonight. Eat it up. And that's it. Or if it's a vow or free will, you have until tomorrow night. And then it needs to either have been eaten or it's been put onto the altar and it is burned. One or the other. Any comments on that?
The tabernacle.
I don't think so. Just for logistics, but it does talk some with the sin offering about cooking it at the tabernacle. But the peace offering, it doesn't mention that. And so I'm hesitant to say yes with the peace offering. I'm much more inclined to say yes with a sin offering. Was that diplomatic enough? I like to be precise. Yes?
One interesting thing, on all the sacrifices, everything is either burned up or eaten, and none of it is ever thrown out where it could potentially decompose and see corruption.
Yep.
So even these sacrifices do not see corruption.
Yeah. And even with the sin offering we're about to get into, part of it is thrown out, but still burned. Yeah, so you're exactly right. Exactly right. And then there's no accidental consumption either. You think about it, if you're very hungry and you're poor and you walk by and there's some meat right there that's choice meat, it will be tempting. Choice ashes, not nearly as tempting.
Allow a holy one to see corruption, and these sacrifices are holy.
Yes.
You won't even allow them to see corruption.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They are allowed to for the first day if it's a Thanksgiving peace offering, because that you need to come home and eat it. The priests can't. They have to eat whatever they've been given right there. That is their food for the day. They're not taking it home. You have to be of Aaron's sons. But the one who's brought the animal has a day for the Thanksgiving or 2 days for the vow or free will. Yeah, they do have a little more time.
Is there a lot of eating going on with the priest?
Yeah,
Sounds like
it's a lot of food. So what do you do with the excess if you're a priest and you can't eat it all?
The wives, the children, I mean, nothing's passed down to their.
They come out of tithes. So there's your distinction. So this is you don't have to send your husband to work with lunch and dinner. He's taken care of there. And out of the tithes comes the rest of your food and your livelihood. Yeah. And so what do they do with the rest of it? If a priest can't eat all of the food, he has to burn it. Nothing's left over out of his. His is gone. He ate what he could, which may at times be very ceremonial. I ate a bite, and literally, if I've got 100 more coming along, that may be all I'm eating out of each one. But you must eat some. You must eat of the breast. You must eat of the thigh. And then you put the rest of it on the altar. Yes?
Over and over again, we've seen, too, that the blood is forbidden as well. Are we ever given any reason other than, like in Genesis, where the life is in the blood and that is why you don't? I don't know of another reason. I hadn't really thought about that in depth ever either. But
that is the primary reason. And in fact, when we look at chapter 17, probably next week or the week after, we will be looking at blood and some of the reasons behind why God does what he does to keep them from eating the blood. But the answer is usually life is in the blood. That's usually what it boils to.
Interesting that the way that Jesus wants us to remember him is through, this is my blood.
Yep.
That represents the new covenant and everything like this. That's interesting how that plays out. And then also it's even more interesting when you think about Catholicism and some of the false religions and thoughts there that it actually becomes his blood, literally, when you're partaking. And blood is forbidden all throughout, even I think in Acts.
They encourage the Gentiles not to eat with blood, yeah. Yes?
More diseases in the blood.
There is, yep.
That's the reason, that was one of the reasons God didn't want to do.
Yeah.
This whole process seems so gory.
Mm-hmm.
And if the Israelites had eaten of the fat or the blood or whatever, what form was the blood in? Was it liquid or is it some kind of solid or what at this time?
I mean, even today we make, what is it, blood pudding? Blood sausages? I mean, even today around the world, we can still make it into foods if you're deliberate or if you're careless and just didn't clean it well, would also fall into that category. Yeah. Blaine, did you have one? Okay. I see another hand? Okay. I have about 11 minutes. So I'm going to start in on, I don't want to start in on the sin offering. So I know I didn't tell you to do it, but we're going to go over to chapter 17. And we're going to take a look at some of the things here. Because there's two things in chapter 17 I think is important for us to realize. The first is the first 9 verses. And the second most important is the last of it, from 10 through 16. So that's the whole chapter. In the first section, it talks about where are they to do their sacrificing. In the second section, it talks about the blood. So I'm going to try to hit them both, but if we can only get one, I'm going to get the place of sacrifice in tonight. The Lord said to Moses in verse 1, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, to all the people of Israel, and say to them, this is the thing that the Lord has commanded. If any one of the house of Israel kills an ox or a lamb or a goat in the camp, or kills it outside the camp, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer it as a gift to the Lord, in front of the tabernacle of the Lord, blood guilt shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. This is to the end that the people of Israel may bring their sacrifices that they sacrifice in the open field, that they bring them to the Lord, to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and sacrifice them as peace offerings to the Lord. The priest shall throw the blood on the altar of the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and burn the fat for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons, after whom they whore. This shall be a statute forever for them throughout their generations. And you shall say to them, any one of the house of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn among them who offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer it to the Lord, that man shall be cut off from his people. Okay. So this is some of what we've been talking about, but let's bring it in. This answers the how many times a day question. Because notice what regulation God is establishing here. You own an ox. Your family is hungry. You've killed it. You must have killed it at the tent of meeting. It now becomes a sacrifice of peace offering, which means the breast and the thigh go to a certain place and so forth and so on, right? The fat is burned in a certain way, the blood is put in a certain way. So you only get a day if it's Thanksgiving, but this sounds more like a free will, right? So you get 2 days to eat an ox, 2 days to eat of the flock, or the goat, whatever it is that you happen to have eaten. Why does God make this regulation? And this regulation ends once they get into the land. But for now, while they're in the camp, why does he make this regulation? What did it say? You can take a look in verse 7.
Sacrifices to idols.
Yes. The ESV says goat demons, so I'm going to keep calling them goat demons. Because they were going out in the field, and they were building themselves a little fire, and they were killing animals, sacrificing them to goat demons. Now, all idols are probably included. We're probably talking also going back into Egypt and things of that kind. And remember, goat demons tends to be the Hebrew that refers to what we call just normal demons. So think about it that way. There's a lot going on here. But then they would bring what was left of their sacrifice back in, and they would come into the camp and they would say, oh, I'm only making dinner. No, you're not. God saw you when you were alone in the field. God saw you when you were alone in your tent and you brought some of the blood in and you offered it to an idol that you thought was secret inside of your tent. God saw you. So, because you people can't leave your idols behind and you keep sacrificing to them, every single animal that you kill needs to be brought here. Every last one of them. If you don't, cut that person off from his people. Literally kick them out of camp. They're not to come back. Done. God is not playing with idolatry. This eliminates some of the blood problem, which is the rest of the chapter. Let's go ahead and read that. If any one of the house of Israel in verse 10 or of the strangers who sojourn among them eats any blood. If you're out in the field, you might. Part of sacrificing to some of the idols involves blood of varying degrees. I will set my face against that person who eats blood and will cut him off from his people. God sets his face. You cut them off if you see him bringing in an animal that they didn't sacrifice as a peace offering to the Lord. But God says, I'm going to take care of this one. Because you may not know. Maybe they went out there, they did the sacrifice, they don't bring it back, but they ate some of that blood in that ritual sacrifice. God says, I'm going to handle this. I will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. It is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Going back to Ben's point here, the life is literally in the blood. It is what gives you that atonement. Therefore I have said to the people of Israel, no person among you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood. 13 down through verse 16 says, what do you do if you come across an animal someone else killed? You get rid of it right there. You pour its blood into the earth and you cover it with the earth. You shall not eat the blood. You make it gross and gritty and sand-filled so that no one comes along and you are not tempted to eat of the blood. and then you have to clean yourself up. Any questions or comments before I let you go get your kids? Okay. It does. Yeah. At least for the wandering years. Okay. Next time, read the sin offering and the guilt offering. There's a typo on the first page. The last one should say guilt offering. It says grain. What are you going to do? But read the sin and read the guilt.